Hello everyone, my name is Fox. In this video we're looking at Anbernic's latest device, their RG353V. Thank you very much to Anbernic for sending this out to me for a review. They did send me their higher end model here. They do have a lower end model, the VS, and it's only slightly less in price. However, I feel like the VS is probably the most competitive and what people should be getting, despite the fact that the V has significant upgrades and more features, but we'll talk more about that in a moment. Real quick, let's talk about the specs and we'll kind of go over what's not on the V and the VS. So on the V version, we do have dual OS, Android 11 and Linux, and that is largely because of having 2 gigs of RAM on the V version. The VS only has 1 gig of RAM, and you're really going to have a bad time running Android with only 1 gig of RAM. So Linux only on the VS makes most sense and also is totally fine. For both versions, we are using Rockchip's 3566 quad-core Cortex-A55, which is a decent enough chip and finds itself in a nice area in the $100 range. On board for the V series, we have 32 gigs of high-speed eMMC storage. On the VS version, that's 16 gigs. The highlight for me of this particular device really is that 3.5-inch 640 by 480 screen. On the V series, we have multi-touch on the panel. On the VS version, it is not touch. Both of them feature 2.4 and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. Now, it says support Android games. That is only on the V series. The VS doesn't run Android, so it won't support that. For the battery, this is actually accurate. I ran PlayStation Emulation, full brightness, full speaker blast, and just having go in a circle. And we did get close to 6 hours, and then that's like worst case scenario, right? So we're doing pretty high-end emulation for the device. Brightness at full screen, sound at max, so pushing the device as far as it possibly can go, and we're actually getting that 6-hour mark. We might get like 7 or maybe 8 hours on lower end emulation. So saying 6 hours is something that I really appreciate here, because this is, in my view, reasonably accurate, even as a worst case scenario. This is the other parts of the box, and they're pretty much standard Anbernic stuff that's going on here. The other thing that's in the V series is it does include goodies in the box, which won't be with the VS version. So the V version, you do get a screen protector. This particular pamphlet that shows you what you're doing is there. Now, they do sell other versions where they will include different types of micro SD cards. So this is the included 64 gigabyte card that they sent me. This is the 64 gigabyte card that they sent me. And one of the reasons that you're going to want to get the card that Anbernic supplies with you is if for whatever reason you find yourself having difficulty finding ROMs. That is really going to be the main difference if you need that or not. They do sell it without having that 64 gigabyte card, and it'll make it cheaper for you. All right, let's start taking a look at the Android side of the RG353V. For the most part, this is really well done, and everything can be found in the notification shade when you just kind of swipe down. The big thing here that I like is this little Anbernic logo will get you straight into a launcher. Now, right in here, you can see that I am in Nintendo Switch mode. Nintendo mode. So the form factor of these buttons is such that they are laid out in an array that is Nintendo style, meaning A is enter and B is cancel. So negative, positive. Now, for most gamers, whatever your form factor is, whatever you want, depending on, you might want to switch that over internally, right? So now I just switched it over to Xbox mode, which you just saw right there. And now internally, these are inverted, even though physically they're like this. This is A and this is B. So if, like on Xbox, A is affirmative and B is cancel. So that's really cool to have like that if for whatever reason you want to play games in a different way, or because we're on Android now, we can actually do Game Pass game streaming, which I'll show you in a little bit, and it's really cool to have Xbox mode there, so I'm glad that's there. The other thing to note is that the launcher that is automatically in here, so you can see the launcher, once that toggle is activated, even if I were to go and just, it will always bring me back here, which is really cool. So this is a fully featured launcher. In all respects, this is now the main avenue that you're going to be doing things. The only other thing that I want to note here is that if you opted to get the SD card from Anbernic, it'll automatically know to pull from these set of games. The only thing is if you add a game to this, you want to press this select key, you want to go to game settings, and you want to say start searching for more games. What you're looking at is a pre-cached list. So if you loaded your game on the SD card and you don't see it, it's because it's previously indexed and you're looking at a cache list. You need to rescan to get back into there. So very quickly you can just go ahead and just launch whatever game, not needing to have any standalone emulator, and it's a very quick way, a very nice way for a lot of people that I know that don't like standard emulators and kind of noodling around. They just want something that is really quick. So really cool to see that is just kind of baked in. So that is mostly the front-end emulation, which is really cool. The other nice thing to see present here is the virtual controller. There we go. So in this mode, if you were to load up any particular Android game that does not support built-in game controls, what's going to happen here is that you can just, kind of move around the B button. And this, when you press B, would correspond to a touch on the screen. This is really necessary for a lot of Android games that don't support gamepad support. So that is a nice feature to have on an Android gaming console. So for the most part, this is really fully featured. There isn't a whole bunch that I would say is a big problem here. My only wish is that it did support Google Play support, and I'm sure that's going to be available like on the Anbernic Discord. If you look in the description below, I will be shooting you guys over to the Anbernic Discord as well if you wanted to go there or you needed any particular support. So that'll be there. For the most part, they do include a lot of emulators and stuff. The only thing that I really wish that they added by default on the Android base was Mixplorer, because Mixplorer is literally the best file explorer for Android. The other nice bit here is that the function key, which is on the Linux side, does a bunch of stuff, is mapped to the back button in Android, which is nice to see, just to have a very quick way to press back. Really well thought out on the Android side. There are a few things here and there that I kind of wish were present, mostly just the Google Play support, but for the most part, with that front end, everything there, it is really well full-featured and nice. At this point, we're going to go ahead and look at the Linux side of things, so I'm going to go ahead and power this down. Alright, so now we're on the Linux side of the RG353V. This would be also what you would see on the VS version. Now, for the most part, this just looks absolutely glorious on this 640 by 480 screen. It really highlights everything here, and this will be present on the lower end version as well, and just looks just spectacular. Now, a lot of games do scale up really well. I mean, just looking at the screen, and this will be present on both versions. It's a pleasure to look at here, even for like older games that are just getting scaled up, still look really, really nice here. So that's just something I wanted to highlight really quick. So you're going to go ahead and press the function key to get out of this. This will bring up effectively the RetroArch side of things, so you can quickly exit out of there. Now, for the most part, this launcher is pretty much straightforward. The other part that is just really cohesive here, if we go ahead and press select, you can go ahead and take a look at the Anbernic manual itself. So in here would be that pamphlet that you see that a lot of people are most likely just going to throw away. But as a nice added feature, you can quickly just go and learn anything that you need to do to quickly get to any of the particular features. So they teach you things in a quick, easy to read way on the screen itself. Just fantastic job there. I love that it has an included manual that is easy to get to. It's one of those things that is just the full rounded part of this. Additionally, like if you press start, you can see Kodi Media Center. Now, typically, when these devices have like HDMI out, for me, that is not something that I would particularly do. Now, you do have Bluetooth on here, so you could connect a controller, and if you wanted to have something where you're planning on going vacation, perhaps you would do that. That's not something that I would normally do, but I do see an avenue where you would connect or store videos on this particular device. They don't technically need to be 4x3 by limit of this particular screen. You could HDMI out to your hotel TV screen and play videos that you want to play. So having this already built in is super cool, and using HDMI out is a feature that I think is worthwhile. Additionally, when we press like quit here, you can see it says exit to Anbernic. So there's no generic part of this. Everything is really well done. Like there's little attention to detail all over the place that I just feel like this is a really well done instance on the Linux side, especially on the Android side. The Android side is really good as well. There's, nice little touches everywhere. But even if you were to get the VS model, the lower end model for this, I think you're going to have a good time, especially when we start talking about game performance, in that Dreamcast runs better on the Linux side than it does on the Android side, and we'll show you that in a moment. Okay, so one of the things that I would recommend you doing, and this kind of will be tuned by you based on whatever game you're going to be playing, but it's something that I would recommend. By default, on the default build for Linux, Dreamcast is going to run at 320 by 240. Now, the screen's native resolution is 640 by 480, and it can resolve at that. So you will have a benefit by running at 640 by 480, but not for all games. Some games may not run at that resolution. The only thing that I want to make note of here is that when you are playing a game, you have to restart the emulator whenever you change the resolution. So right now we are running at 320 by 240, and I'll show you what that looks like in game in a second. So you can really see a bunch of aliasing right there. And it doesn't look that great, but it runs reasonably well. This doesn't run well on Android side, regardless if you're using Flycast on RetroArch or you're using Redream. So this is one area where I would recommend that. Really quick, let me show you what that looks like on the Android side. So there it is. So I'm running at 320 by 240 right now, but it runs much better than it does on Android. But let's go ahead and run this game at 640 by 480. So we're going to press the function key. We're going to go to options. Let me press A. We'll go to video here, and we'll do 640 by 480. Now, if you just do this, it tells you that restart is required right there. You can see it's all going to be gnarly right here. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're just going to quit to RetroArch, which will go to Anbernic, and then we go back into the game. At this point, Dreamcast really is going to be the high end of what's playable on this system, and that's kind of where I find this whole value segment of being a little bit weird, because the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus can play Dreamcast games just fine, and it's basically going to be $130 for the low-end model, but overall it's a nice package, whereas you're going to be playing $130 for the V model, more or less. They do have a nice transparent purple one, but now you can see at 640 by 480 there's no gnarly aliasing going on. It looks much cleaner, still playing very, very nice. So that's basically the main core part of this that I wanted to kind of address, is the tiers of types of gameplay that you're going to be playing on this particular type of device. Is that Dreamcast is going to be the high end of this. Playing PSP games is going to be something that's playable, but on the particular resolution isn't the best. So that's going to be for you to decide. I really do like playing a lot of 4x3 content on this device. So let's go ahead and go into some gameplay segments at this point. Metal Slug X is something that is a really nice highlight for this particular screen. It really is a shame that NEOGEO was the last bastion of like high-end pixel work. But it just looks fantastic on this screen. So this is PSP emulation, and for the most part, it runs a lot of games just fine. Really, when it comes down to these game demos, it's just kind of want to highlight how nice this screen is and how it recreates the experience. Overall, it is easily the highlight and something that is going to be present on the VS as well. So one other game that I want to show off for just the screen as well is just the Genesis Sonic game. So just looking at that screen, I mean, it just really is the highlight of this particular device for me. And that is going to be something that is present on either of the versions. So I really particularly prefer the Linux build for the RG353V. I do like having the feature of having Android as well. The only thing that's there that's kind of cool is that you can do game streaming on there, which is neat to see. But even for N64 emulation, Dreamcast emulation, the height of what these devices are going to be able to emulate is Nintendo 64, Sega Saturn, Dreamcast. There are going to be Sega Saturn games that are not playable. There are going to be Dreamcast games that aren't really all that playable. But that is the upper bound of what you're going to find on here. And if we take a look at the VS model at $100, that makes a lot of sense. The only other thing that I want to talk about here is build quality. And overall, I think Anbernic has done a solid job keeping up with their sense and sensibility of how they design particular stuff. If we talk about the form factor of this particular device, having all these triggers back here, I do like this smaller form factor as opposed to the larger version that Anbernic had made in the past. If we were to compare it in size to what I would think is the current competition, which would be the Retroid Pocket 3, you can see that the Retroid Pocket 3 is substantially larger, but it also has a larger screen, and this is much better for actually game streaming, even though the Anbernic RG353V with Android does support game streaming. You can kind of get an idea of the types of dimensions that we got going on here, and this being the comparative in terms of what it's competing with today. Overall, both of these are really solid options, and it's really what you're looking to get out of it. For the $100 model, it's going to be a little bit cheaper than this, though there is the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus, which is $100, but I don't really like the form factor for that. I would say upselling to the Retroid Pocket 3, if you didn't already have a Retroid Pocket 2 Plus, that the Retroid Pocket 3 makes more sense at the $130 model, whereas the $100 model finds itself in a nice spot with its particular form factor and buttons. Overall, let's go ahead and take a look at how the D-pad and analog sticks operate. We're going to go ahead and jump into Android for that. All right, so up first, let's take a look at how the analog sticks respond. We do have relatively full range. We can see that on the right stick that I have here that I am kind of on the edge here, but this is still more than serviceable. I like to see a full square here instead of circularity, and that's, I guess, an opinion at this point, because some people like circularity. Having full range means that you're not going to have any interruptions with any directionality that you want your character to go. The left stick here has full range here, which is great to see. We can see that when I move around the analog stick that there is cardinal snapping. If I were to move it a little bit, let's see how far, if I can get this in frame. Dead zones appear to be really small. Like it almost instantly activates out of its dead zone fast. There is cardinal snapping. Let's see how, yeah. So even when I feel like I'm pushing diagonally, it wants to travel along the cardinal axis to a pretty high degree. I don't think it's going to be that bad. You can really see it snapping to its cardinal axis there. This is fine. I mean, for most people, I think that this is how people anticipate it to be. The real problem is that how it's positioned and where it is and how you have to like hold it to use it. It's a little finicky in terms of sensitivity. In terms of comfort, I don't think that where they are placed is excellent. However, they are fine in terms of what they are doing. You have really good range, really good dead zones, but the cardinal snapping is a little bit high to my liking. It kind of wants to really stick to its cardinal axis. But for all intents and purposes, they are worthwhile analog sticks, but the placement of them makes them a little bit weird. If we were to talk about other types of functionality on the device, the other thing here to note is that the D-pad remains to be really good, as is normal for Anbernic devices. The D-pad here is reasonably good. The one thing that I want to note here is that the one part where I always found a difficult part, it being in the southeast part of the D-pad, always having to kind of flex a little bit more. I'm not having that issue here. Overall, it is a solid membrane-based D-pad. This is quite excellent. In the back, we can see that we have these triggers. Now, my feelings on the triggers and how they're used. First, I'm not a fan of inline shoulders to begin with. Trying to memorize which one is L1 and R1, you know, like R2 and L2 being on the inside versus on the outside. That is something that is still strange to me. It's nothing that I can really get via muscle memory ever. I don't really like where the placement is, but I understand that this is just a compromise of having this on this particular system, and this is to actually get full support for PlayStation 1, which this system does emulate just fine. So I don't know how you would possibly stack it without making it look uglier. I don't really think that there's much that you could do here. I would have probably preferred not having the analog sticks on here and seeing if the device could be a little smaller, but then that would have compromised how big the battery would be. Overall, I don't think that there is anything like you could realistically change about the build of the Anbernic RG353V or VS. It is well thought out, well made. Overall, it is a solid device. Input-wise, it's everything that I could care to want. The D-pad and the face buttons are excellent. The analog sticks are fine. They do their job. I don't really think that they're a value in particular. The analogs are like, I would say C+. D-pad is an A. Face buttons are an A. These shoulders are like a B- for me. Overall, the inputs are the inputs that I care about, the main ones, are great. So having said that, I think overall that the inputs of what you're looking to get, what the device can emulate, the types of systems that you're going to emulate, all of that is as good as I want it to be. All right, the last bit here that I want to talk about is game streaming, and it is totally possible on this device. The 5 gigahertz is good enough to do game streaming on this device. I don't think that it is the best platform with this particular screen. Widescreen would 100% be better. In that area, I do think the Retroid Pocket 3 is superior in that particular regard, but it's something that I wanted to talk about as it is a hot button topic because Stadia just closed right now, and for the most part, I think that this is something that I think that these devices should start kind of highlighting. I got lights blaring in my face, and this game screen right now is kind of dark, and I'm trying to record and play through my viewfinder right now, so apologies. But you can see that playing game streaming on this device is 100% possible. So it is a pretty cool thing that, yeah, it's totally possible, and this would only be on the Android build right now. The Linux side, playing on XCloud, I'm not even sure how you would do it. You'd have to at least install a browser. But it does work just fine on the 353V, and that 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi is... oh, goodness. All right, I think everyone's dead. All right, so this is totally an area where it can absolutely work. I don't think that the screen size is perfect for game streaming. I think this is one area where the Retroid Pocket 3 actually is superior in this regard. However, when we start thinking about... let me pause this game real quick. When we start thinking about these newer devices and the types of functionality, having enough performance, having enough memory, having a good enough Wi-Fi chip in here to support game streaming, this is an area that I think is a nice avenue complementary to what types of gaming you can already expect, and this does support game streaming just fine, as we can see here. But again, the screen is a little bit small, so you have to bring it close to your face, and we're having letterboxing because of the type of screen that we're looking at here. But because it's high resolution, it does still look really, really nice and totally playable. So that's that. I'm going to end it there. Let me go ahead and bring up the Xbox thing, and we'll quit out of here, and we'll go to conclusion. The market right now is completely saturated. So where I view the 353V and VS, for the VS on the Linux side, it runs really, really well. Like, there's a lot of games that are going to run very well. On Android, you're going to have game stream with XCloud getting to easier way to browse and kind of navigate and take control of the system without needing anything external. So for me, I think the VS still has a real nice spot there, but I know that a lot of people find $30 extra as a value-added upcharge are probably going to do that. The only thing that I would kind of put as a caveat in there is that I think at $100, the VS model makes a lot of sense for what types of games that you're going to be playing on there. And the V with Android at $130, I think that the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus is better at that price point. So that's where I get kind of fuzzy. The market is really saturated with these types of devices. If you wanted this particular form factor, it is really good. The analog sticks here find themselves to be a little bit wanting. Overall, I don't feel that it's totally necessary, as the main interface for these buttons are the D-pad and face buttons, which are excellent. So I can 100% recommend the $100 version of this. The ceiling of games you're going to be playing on there is Dreamcast, N64, and Sega Saturn. So that's pretty much where I'm ending off on here. I think at $130, the upper end model, you're going to be able... it's going to get a little cloudy, and it's really going to... the drive for your decision will be based on the form factor of the device over anything. Hopefully that's clear. I am really positive on this device. I think Anbernic did a fantastic job overall, and it's what a lot of people wanted out of Anbernic, so I think this is a return to form for a lot of people and what their expectations for Anbernic was. That is my look at Anbernic's latest device, the RG353V. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.